Welcome to Inside the Hive on the Charlotte Hornets on SI Podcast Network. Hey, the Charlotte Hornets might not be turning up anymore, but Inside the Hive still are. I'm joined by Sam Dracula, as we are every week. A day late, a little bit later than we thought. This week I had some personal things going on, but we're still here. We're going to be breaking down our thoughts on a very rough stretch of Hornets basketball, or maybe it's just normal Hornets basketball by now. We should just get used to it. But our main feature today is we're going to be doing what's become an annual tradition. It's the second time we've done it. Last season, I was joined by Richie Randall of BuzzBeat to do it, which is our Hornets Blame Pie, where we allocate percentages to of responsibility for a disastrous failed season, which we did last year with Richie Randall. And we're going to do again for this season. The 4 categories are players, coaching, front office, and luck. And both myself and Sam, and we don't know each other's percentages, have assigned our percentages. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But Sam, I want to ask you, is this rock bottom for the season?
Ooh, no.
Right now?
No. There's too many games left. No. No, because
we've not even seen LaMelo get shut down yet, right?
Legit. It was an 8-game losing streak. We've already seen a 10-1, right? It's been worse already this season. And there's a lot of basketball. I think, 20 games left? Something like that?
Yep.
Plenty of opportunity to hit full rock bottom.
We got time for another players-only meeting, do we think, before the end of the year? Or do we think, like, when it reaches March, like, the players don't even care at that point? They're like, we're near the end. We've seen the end.
Well, who knows what they're meeting about? Maybe they want to meet about where they want a vacation. It doesn't have to be basketball related. You know what I mean? Boys trip, Cancun, lock in.
I mean, at least they'll be doing something together, team bonding.
Yeah.
Let's have a look here. The last 10 games, or the last 9 games, the Hornets have scored over 101 points once in the last 10 games, basically. Which the Hornets offense has been not getting out of second gear. It's been in first. It's been in neutral. The Hornets offense to not be able to score 100 points comfortably in the modern NBA is astonishing, especially when LaMelo Ball has not played all those games, but played enough that you'd think it would happen. Look, there were the record back-to-back stretch that we had there with the Blazers, the Kings, the Warriors losses. There was a closer game against the Mavericks, then a depressing loss against the Washington Wizards. Get out the brush. We're going to sweep the Hornets. I think that's the second year in a row the Hornets have lost to the team with the worst record in the NBA by a straight sweep. It's a Charlotte tradition like no other. I remember it going back to the Sixers process. We used to lose to the Sixers all the time in their 11-win season or whatever it was. They beat us. They had a winning record against us. The Nets, in their failed, miserable time as well, they used to beat the Hornets all the time. It is a tradition like no other to go up and lose to the worst team in the league, and then to go on the road and beat Denver, or you beat the LA Lakers in LA. It just shows that this team has a real issue of turning up to compete every single night. Everyone thinks professional athletes should approach every game the same way, give 100% every night. It's just they're human. Just like me and you. Just like how, some days you'll wake up, Sam, and you'll go, I'm not going to work as hard today as I did yesterday. I don't quite feel like it. Sorry if your manager's listening to this, but I'm sure that does happen.
It happens. Guilty.
I mean, but it's pretty sad, right? There's been very, very little to be excited about in the last 2 weeks. And we kind of touched on some of the new faces last week and we skipped over some of the bad stuff. But today, we're going to be doing a lot of analyzing of what has gone wrong to get us to this point. And I think if you're wanting some Hornets therapy to understand and to really hear honest analysis and where things have fallen down, I think this is going to be the episode to you. And I think it's the right time to do it.
I think so too. I'm excited though. I'm excited for it.
Before we get into our blame pie, we should touch on a little bit of notable news, which is Kyrie Irving for the Dallas Mavericks has torn his ACL. I actually saw a video. It's pretty brutal. I think Kyrie knew he'd done it yesterday and was, I think, taking his free throws while crying. So just a brutal break for the Dallas Maverick fan base, a brutal break for Kyrie Irving, for everyone on the Mavericks who just think, and look, if you want some good news as Hornets fans, how quickly things can turn, the Mavericks were coming off a NBA Finals appearance less than 12 months ago. 9 months ago, I think they was doing it. And fast forward, and the future of the franchise looks pretty bleak. And another example like that turnaround was the Houston Rockets, right? Remember when they went from being Steven Silas coaching the worst team in the league, hired Ime Udoka, signed some veteran free agents, and last year they were feisty, and now this year they are, again, like a Western Conference playoff team. Things can turn so quickly in this league, and that is one thing that we should remind Hornets fans, as bleak as it feels right now.
No doubt. No doubt. Like one guy can make a big difference. And there's a chance that can happen this year. What happens around that one guy, we'll see. Right? There's a lot of chatter about what this, like who may not be part of this team next season. But it is the Hornets, thankfully, are in a position where other teams may still want their guys. It's not like things are bad and no one wants any of the Hornets players. There's moves that could happen, and it's just a matter of what the trade return looks like if they go down that route.
Yeah. But the reason the Kyrie Irving news was especially pertinent to Charlotte is because the Hornets own the 2027 first-round pick of the Dallas Mavericks. Now, due to the lateness in the year that Kyrie Irving has suffered the injury this year, he is most likely to be out for all of next season, if not right up to the playoffs, which means that the Mavericks are probably going to finish out the playoffs this year. I think they will struggle next year if they just have Anthony Davis, some role players for most of the season. And then the season after that is the year that the Hornets have that pick. And Luka Doncic is no longer in Dallas. Anthony Davis is an aging, injury-prone star. That 2027 pick is only top 2 protected, Sam. That is, like, they could be the worst team in the league, and I think the Hornets would have something like over a 50% chance to get that pick, even if that were to be the case. So while this is terrible news for the Dallas Mavericks and Kyrie Irving, it's hard to not look at this any other way that this is positive news for the Charlotte Hornets.
No doubt. Does it convey to an unprotected 28 pick?
It must do, yeah. Yeah, it must do, yeah.
Okay. Well, like it's a beautiful place to be if the Hornets want to use it or flip it, right? And I feel the same way about the Miami pick. Who knows how that'll turn out? But this is a rare, fortunate thing to happen for Charlotte, even though it does suck that it came from an injury. I was rooting for Dallas to be awesome right up until that 27 season, because I think that'd be funny if they trade Luka and got better. But it didn't work out that way, and it sucks for them. But it could be good for us.
Absolutely could be. Definitely true that the value of that pick has gone up. And like you said, the Miami Heat pick that they also own in that year is also interesting because if the Heat missed the playoffs this year, I believe it becomes unprotected, right? In 2028, rather than a lottery protected pick in 2027 if the Heat make the playoffs. So if you're trying to find, who do I want to root for down the stretch of this NBA season, you probably want to be rooting against the Miami Heat, which is always easy to do for Charlotte Hornets fans. We know that by now. But Sam, should we move on to our main section for today?
Let's do it.
Hornets blame pie. Tasty blame pie. Some home cooking that we're going to get ready here. As I mentioned at the top, we have 4 categories: luck, front office, coaching, players. We have assigned percentages of why we think this Hornets season has failed to each of those. And also, I've asked ChatGPT, and we're going to compare at the end our scores to ChatGPT. But Sam, I am going to go to you, and I would like you to start us with your lowest percentage area on your blame pie chart. Who do you think is least to blame for this Hornets failed season?
So my least percentage is luck. And I gave that you want the number 2?
Yep, give me the number.
3%.
3%.
3% on the pie with luck. Mainly because I think their bad luck has been balanced out pretty like close by some good luck. Like it's not all bad luck. There is some things they've lucked into, things that I would have said yes to as a good outcome before the season started. So from a bad luck point of view, right? Brandon Miller and the rescinded trade. Like those are when I think bad luck, that doesn't get much bigger than that, in my opinion. Trading a guy and getting held up for like a couple of weeks and then coming back, that is, when you're talking bad things, that's pretty up there, right? But on the other side of it, like LaMelo has played more games than he has since 2022. If you told me that going into the season, I would say that's a good outcome. And I think the Hornets are fortunate that happened, right? Mark Williams, the man in the rescinded trade, he's on track to play the most games he's ever played, right? 29 games played so far. There's 22 games left. If he plays all of them, that's 51 games played. You subtract 4 for the back-to-backs that are on the schedule. So that's around 47. His record is 43. Like that is a good thing and a fortunate thing if that plays out like that. And then you factor in Diabate. Like he's been a gift. I think that's a fortunate turn of events for the Hornets this season. And hell, even Josh Okogie is looks like a viable rotation guy going into next year. So I think the Hornets have been unlucky, but it's been kind of balanced out with some of the other side of the injury bug or like the injury coin with LaMelo and Mark Williams availability counter to Brandon Miller and Trey Mann and Grant Williams, et cetera, like that. So that's why I got 3% on luck.
Interesting. I have a significantly high percentage of luck. Okay. And I'm very wary with this. So last year I had 2.5% attributed to luck, right? Okay. So I don't want people to think that I'm someone who just goes, oh, the Hornets are just unlucky all the time. Last year I was very against it. I do think they've been more unlucky this year, and here's my argument as to why. Mm-hmm. Did I say my percentage, by the way?
I don't think so. You said last year's, but I don't think you said this year's.
Okay. This year, you see, this is why it's good to not know what each other have put beforehand, because already I want to change it. But I put 20%.
Okay.
20%, which is 10 times yours, basically. Let's start back at the draft. The Hornets fell back 3 spots in the draft lottery. Right. Ended up with T. Salon. If they'd finished in the top 3 or 4, they'd probably get Stephon Castle, Reza Shea, Reed Shepherd, who are the guys closely linked to them. Stephon Castle especially was a guy who I think would have made a lot of sense for this team. Yep. And I think T. Salon's lack of impact this season, lack of being ready to play, I think has affected this season because they've needed him unexpectedly because of the Grant Williams injury. And I don't think they thought they were going to be in that position. So that's one of my things, going right back to the draft lottery. Last year, I also talked about the kind of bad medical performance, but by then it was track record, right? You had the things going on about Gordon Hayward, Cody Martin, Mark Williams. There was leaks coming out about medical lack of confidence from players. Well, they changed all the medical stuff this year. So whereas last year I was like, I don't want to categorize the poor injury track record down to luck. I think this year I am more open to do it. And keep in mind also Trent Solo, their guy who they hired, head trainer, ended up having a family issue and had to move back to Detroit right halfway through the year. I mean, you couldn't make it up. Just when you think, great, we've got a new head trainer in, he's going to get on top of this. He's had a family issue and he's had to basically leave the organization, still working on a consultancy basis. I also think last year, the players who got injured were like injury-prone players that we knew about. Gordon Hayward, Cody Martin, LaMelo Ball. Whereas this year, Grant Williams, Trey Mann, and Brandon Miller were like the Iron Men last season, right? After following the trades, Grant Williams and Trey Mann, they played in all the games. Brandon Miller sprained his ankle like 5 times last year and came back. So I think the guys who've got hurt have got hurt in are normally very reliable and have got hurt just in like ways that no one would really realize. It's not like it's something you would ever expect with these guys. It's not like LaMelo's weak ankles or Gordon Hayward's dodgy feet or Cody Martin's issue that he had with his hip knee tendinopathy. And then On top of all the big injuries, I mean, some of these just feel so long ago. Remember when Miles Bridges sprained his knee and was out
Yeah.
for like 4 weeks, and even when he came back, wasn't really healthy? Mark Williams got a foot sprain the day of I think media day, or of like, remember it was the day before training camp opened, and he just got a foot sprain. Nick Richards fractured basically a cartilage in his shoulder or in his ribs. Cody Martin developed a sports hernia before he got traded. Just again, a real spate of injuries that happened sometimes all at once, sometimes interspersed with each other. And also, one you didn't mention, LaMelo spraining his ankle while walking back on defense. Remember that one?
Yeah.
On I think it was Jared Vanderbilt, was it?
Yeah.
He was
I think so.
sprained his ankle on him. Again, it's just like, really, how can this go? So this year, I jumped the luck up higher than my previous years. Draft lottery, injuries, and I also did have about the Mark Williams trade as well, which is I don't want to go back on that because you already touched on it, but for those same things. So I went 20% for this year. I think the roster made more sense on paper this year, but as soon as you take off the second, fourth, and fifth leading scorers for the season, which they basically lost with Williams, Mann, and Miller, like a big, a wing, and a guard, you just take those away, like your roster's going to be exposed as soon as that happens.
I think it's a good one. I forgot about falling in the lottery. I forgot all about that. Probably was a self-defense mechanism, but no, that's a good one to have in this category for sure, because that's definitely unlucky.
Yeah. I'm going to then reveal my lowest next, and it's coaching. And I got 10% against that. So I'm curious to hear what you've got for your coaching rating.
9.
Okay, so we're pretty synced up here. All right. I've talked a lot, I feel like, in the last 5 minutes. Speak to me about coaching. What are some of the things that you've got down in coaching? And we'll see where we match up here.
So my main summary about Charles Lee's rookie head coaching tenure is, like, my main gripe is the failure of this team getting up for games or waiting too long to get up for games. I think the players owe themselves a professional responsibility around that, but a lot of that falls on the leader, the on-court leader of the organization, and I think I put that on Charles Lee. We saw it early on when they were finding themselves in close games, but had terrible starts. And now we're in the point of the season, in the dog days of the season, where they just look totally disengaged at times. And that, for me, is something that Lee is going to have to fix next year without a doubt, because hopefully, like, I'm going to say the line, it can't get much worse, right? At some point,
Sam, don't you do it. You can't do that. We've established this now in Charlotte Hornets folklore. You can't say that because it can always get worse.
Good. Get worse. I dare you. I dare you, Charlotte. Find a way. The rescinded trade, that is like next level stuff that was not on the bingo cards. I'm dying to find out which new weird thing could happen to this franchise that could make things worse than they've been. But no, I look at the head coach and at his responsibility for getting these guys right and ready for these games, and I need that to be fixed going into next season. That's why it's at 9% for me. From an X's and O's,
why do you think that's the coach's fault?
He's the leader, and I need him to hold guys accountable for when they're not locked in. Because now, especially now in this point of the season where there's nothing really to play for, if you have a guy who is slow to rotate, not boxing out, or just looks not interested, sit his ass on the bench and put one of the two-way guys in. Like, I need that. I need that type of energy from my head coach when guys aren't finishing or not getting or just not getting going.
I mean, he did do that with LaMelo Ball. He did bench him early
and we did it with
season.
Micic. And I want to see that now, because especially with the guys, I don't want to get too ahead, but like, unless they're just on pure showcase mode where they just want everyone to play out, maybe that's why you don't bench anyone now. But there's some guys that I think could use with the wake up call. And I don't know if that is the directive right now.
So who are you talking about here? Who do you see out here who you think maybe needs to be disciplined with this wake up call?
I think the core three. I think,
All right.
the core three needs a wake up call.
I think it's. I wonder if almost Charles Lee has shifted his coaching approach and mindset at this point to the season than you do early in the season, right? Early in the season, everything's to play for. You're trying to set a standard, establish yourself as a new coach. I wonder if like you go down those hard lines at this point, if you risk losing the locker room. I don't know, right? Like if you're benching your players you're trying to develop at this point for like Damian Barr and Malachi Flynn, just would that be too alienating at this point in the season? I don't know this. I'm just trying to like think because I do know what you mean. Early in the season, it was pretty apparent. Like he benched guys at certain points.
Yeah, Bridges got benched as well.
I think partly it's been like lack of availability, right? Lack of better options.
Yeah.
But you can bench these guys for the two-way guys, but let's just be frank. The two-way guys are worse. They're just worse players. Doesn't matter how many mistakes those core three make. The two-way guys are worse. And I think maybe that's just where he's like at here is like, can I really look at LaMelo Ball in the face when I bench him for Malachi Flynn? And maybe that's just where he is. Where he benched for Trey Mann in that Nets game, and you could see the reasoning there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm just trying to spitball here.
And I think that's valid. But I'll just say, like, you're not winning these games with these guys, right? So if anything, you can get your message across through a substitution and making a guy watch a little bit and reset a little bit. And hopefully next time out you get more from that guy than you did on that night.
Mm. I think some of the headline reasons for me, I mean, there have been 25 players who've played for the Hornets this year. 19 different players have started. Yeah, that is not an easy situation for a coach, right? I think the defensive buy-in has been good for most of the year, and the offense, like they're 19th in defense for the season. I think that's actually probably slightly above this team's talent level. But they have not played well offensively. I think there is an identity there. It's around attacking mixed matches, creating open three-point shots, offensive rebounding, playing through high usage players and really focusing on them. Drop coverage and defense, leaving below average shooters way open. Like I can see this vision. Mm-hmm. I can see they are buying into the game plan. I don't think they've executed it that well at times. Look, you talked about the bad starts. Let's also not forget they've been one of the worst clutch teams in the entire season. Like halfway through the season, they were the worst clutch team in the league. And again, allocating blame on that is always tricky, but you're right. The coach is the leader. The coach takes some responsibility because the game slows down at that point. You can normally kind of go to more through your playbook in those late game situations because you have after timeout situations, and they've struggled in that area. The other issue is the slow pace of play, right? Charles Lee's admitted they should get out and transition more. LaMelo Ball said it after the Warriors game last night, is that like he likes to play fast. Then why aren't they? If Charles Lee wants to play fast, if LaMelo Ball wants to play fast, there is a disconnect there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that is. I do think Lee deserves, I do think they would have won some more games if they hadn't prioritized like development over some of their veteran players. At times, they've played young players over Seth Curry. They've played Salon over Taj Gibson or Diabate. Like, they've made some of these moves where they've clearly just been like, I'm going to throw the young guy out there. Like, Nick Smith Jr. Like, do you think Seth Curry's better than Nick Smith Jr.?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, absolutely. Like, why has Nick Smith Jr. been starting the last 40 games? But, you know, like, it's those kind of things. Like, I know why. Mm-hmm. Because it's development. But with that comes, you know, the worst 3-game stretch in NBA history since the 1950s. That's what you're exposing yourself to, the risks. And I think they've done that. But I still think this team has unity. I think they are behind this team staff. I do think their offensive game plan has been scouted really well by opposing teams. And I haven't loved the kind of lack of adjustments from Charles Lee.
Yep.
Yeah, he's even mentioned like early in the season, he's like, we spent a lot of time on defense in training camp and our offense was behind. Like that's partly okay, Charles, but you realize you have to play both ends in the NBA. Like you can't just say, well, we didn't focus on the offense in training camp, that's why we're bad. Well, why weren't you able to balance both? Other teams were out there doing it. So, but if you take all of that out, what coach is changing the record for this team by like more than 5 wins?
Exactly.
Steve Clifford. You can bring back Phil Jackson from the 90s. You can bring in Steve Kerr. I don't think a particularly better coach is drastically changing the outcome of this team. I think they could have like 4 or 5 more wins. But I think Charles Lee, if he was playing to win every game and playing for his job, he probably would have changed things a little bit to do that already.
I think it's well said. I agree.
All right. So I'm really interested. The last 2 sections we have left now are the front office and players. And you still have, what, like 88% to allocate here? Is that right?
I got a big number to throw at somebody here.
You do. Okay.
Got a big ass number.
Give me your next lowest.
Okay. The players. 16%.
All right.
And this, I touched on this earlier, but there's a lack of professional pride that I see watching this team every night. It's not everybody, it's not all the time, but it pops its head up every single game. Either one person, multiple people, and it's embarrassing at times. And I go straight to the Wizards games. Like that is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. The Wizards have zero interest in winning basketball games. And to lose 4 out of 4 is insane. You understand? Like, that is insane. Wizards, who had no intention of ever winning. It's not like a team that, maybe we can make a run and then let's start tanking. They were ready to tank off the go. Terrible. It's terrible stuff, man. And I get texts from people, I don't talk to the Hornets about when stuff like this happens, when they're getting blown out in 3 straight games. I get texts from folks. I'm like, man, listen, I don't know what you want from me. I wish they tried harder. What do you want?
You see, I agree it's embarrassing, especially as like a fan or a media. It's embarrassing to be associated with a team that does that. But I also do go back to what Steve Clifford used to say. And he says, like, sometimes when the team is playing poorly, it comes across as bad effort. And that's not the case. Like, sometimes their effort is good. It's just that their execution and their purpose of play and the decisions they made were poor. Mm-hmm. So do you think it is, when you're saying like it's embarrassing, lack of professional pride, are you saying that you think there are guys out there not playing as hard as the other team? Or do you think you're saying that they're not executing to the level that they should be of the capability of the players in the team?
I'm saying they're not playing as hard as they could or should be. I think I've seen Mark Williams just concede the low block time after time after time, not putting himself in position to grab offensive rebounds, right? And we've seen guys slow to rotate or just fail to communicate when the ball's in transition, right? And oh man, I wish I could remember the game of it. This game, we talked about this a few weeks ago. It was the Martin Luther King, the game on MLK Day during the day, where the team felt like alive, where I was watching in my living room. It felt like I was ready to run through a brick wall. Like I was so hyped and there was so much energy coming out through my television screen. And that's the only time I felt that way watching this team play, short of maybe the Lakers game was similar to that. That was really exciting. But where it felt like the bench, starters, everyone was locked in at the same time and giving their full effort. And that feeling as a viewer, there's like few and far between. Like, and I put that on the players.
One of the points I have here, and I think you're tapping into the same point to hit as me here, is I do feel this team lacks resilience.
Okay.
When things get hard, when the shots aren't going in, when the crowd isn't in their favor, when they go down 15 points early, and I know Charles Lee has like praised the team's resilience at times, but
That's the frustrating thing. They've shown that they can fight back and get into games, but
at
they just
times
don't.
they can.
Their
But
consistency is not there.
And I would say LaMelo Ball, actually, I would say is probably one of the biggest guilty parties of this. When things are going well, LaMelo Ball looks alive. When things aren't going well, you kind of like, you forget he's out there and you feel like he's going through the motions and he's not giving it absolutely everything, because it really jumps off the screen, like in that Lakers game, when he's being aggressive, when he's being like more physical, when he's like into the game and he's chatting back at the other team. And I do get the sense, especially with LaMelo, that there are nights where he's just like, we don't have it tonight, and I'm going to give a B effort rather than an A plus effort. And I think the whole team, I think they've realized, the team, that they have that issue. That's why they brought in the likes of Josh Green, T-John Salon, Musa Diabate. Who are these guys? Like, I'd say all those guys, like, success, impactful, whatever. But they approach every game with a level of intensity, and they don't just like have games where they kind of look like they're taking it off. And I just think the Hornets, and I think this is just built into the losing. They've lost, so many of these guys have just lost for such a large period of time, and it's in the walls of Spectrum Center. Like, everyone just expects it and accepts it way more so than probably players in other NBA teams. And man, it's got to be freaking hard when you're LaMelo Ball and you've played through however many games now, 200, 300 games, and you've just seen this whole thing before. And you know the team, the franchise really just is eyeing up the number one draft pick. Like, so I also think the team ethos and history of the team and front office also feeds into that, like, lack of, why am I giving my all when the front office and the team aren't giving their all to try and win these games? Like, it's easy to sit here as an analyst and say, they've got to be better. But I think that's a real thing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons they brought in Taj Gibson, right? To be that player voice.
Yep.
And, it's not his full responsibility to lift everybody up, but there were roster moves to address this, to get ahead of this, and it hasn't panned out in that. And it hasn't been impactful enough to avoid this problem.
Yeah.
Did you give a percentage, by the way?
Mine was 25%.
25
for players. Yeah. And again, you look at teams like the Orlando Magic, right? Great example this year. They've been injured for a bunch of the year. They were last year too. That team played the same way, the same urgency and effort, execution, physicality, defense every single night, no matter if Suggs was out there, Paolo was out there, Franz was out there or not. Like, they all just did the same way. And I just don't feel like the Hornets have been able to do that. Some other factors here, note some of my thoughts on the players. I don't think there's been any huge jumps in terms of development from the players who were kind of like on the team last year. I don't think any of them, I don't know. I don't feel anyone's had a bad season, but I don't feel anyone's had like a shocking, oh my God, where did that come from? He's really like, we changed the way we think about this player now. Trey Mann might have been that guy, and obviously his season got cut short, but I feel like there's not been those jumps that you need in development. When you have a really young team, which the Charlotte have, you sometimes get those type jumps that you see from the Dyson Daniels, right, of the world.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like the Hornets have had any of those big jumps this year.
I think it's probably just LaMelo that it got as the only guy who's.
You look at all the numbers. All he's done is had a higher usage and put up the same numbers. Now that deserves some credit, because not everyone can just like have a higher usage rate, take more shots and take more offensive possessions and like be as efficient as they were before. A lot of people would slide back if that was the case. But like, especially the last 20 games, I mean, LaMelo's been bad.
Yeah.
Like, he's not been anywhere near the level that he started the season. If we're talking the first 6 weeks, LaMelo Ball, I agree with you. There was a jump there. After that, I think he's kind of been similar to the guy that we saw come back from injury the last couple of years. Like, inefficient, have great games here, but bad games there.
Yeah, I'd say Trey Mann, but to your point, he's not around. And then
Yeah.
Nick Richards, who's not around anymore either.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like the guys that were on a path of making a leap are either hurt or traded.
And I looked at this, right? The way I view this as the players is when if you're putting out players out there who just aren't of the level, I don't blame those players because like they are giving their all, but they only have so much talent and ability.
Right.
And this group of players, Damian Barr, Daquan Jeffries, Wendell Moore Jr., Alfred Payton, Vasil Micic, Nick Smith Jr., Taj Gibson, T. Salon, KJ Simpson, and Isaiah Wong have all been rotation players at some point in the season. And not a single one of those players should be in an NBA rotation, an every night rotation. That group has played 4,170 non-garbage time minutes. So that's when the game is like out of hand. And I can tell you like that number will be over 4,500 minutes when you take that into that account. The core four total, Miller, Williams, Bridges, LaMelo, have played 4,365 minutes. So you're just talking about the Hornets have played a lot of bad players this year because of a mixture of injuries and trade. And yeah, go on.
I was gonna say to add to that, I think there's an argument to say like Josh Green and Miles Bridges aren't starters on good NBA teams either, and they're starters in Charlotte. Like everyone is kind of slotted up because of the state of the roster.
Yeah,
and
which is
those
not
are the two
their
leading
fault.
minutes getters. Yeah,
it's not their fault.
Yeah,
Josh Green should be a bench, bench defender who comes in off the bench and gives you energy. Miles Bridges could start for the right team, but like it's probably better suited to being a sixth man. We've seen he's been more comfortable playing with the ball in his hands more, which he's just not going to do on many NBA teams because you're about as good as the Hornets when he's one of your top two options.
Right.
So I don't blame that group of players for this season being bad when like some of those players have actually played all right at moments this year. Like, but yeah. So I went players 25%. That leaves our last category, front office, which for me has a rating of 45%. And I'll say I started at 60 and I worked it backwards, actually, after doing some of my deep dive and my analysis and my write-up. But for you, this is going to be a big number. What is your front office portion of blame?
72.
72%.
I started at 80. It got to 72.
And you worked back as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm interested to hear you out here.
Yeah, before I like get into everything, I just want for me, this was the plan all along, and no one can convince me otherwise. And so when you're placing blame on this season, the front office, this is their work, this is their baby that we all have to witness every night because they never intended to be good this year.
Did they intend to be this bad?
I'm gonna say yes.
No,
I'm going to say yes. Hear me out. Because
I think they wanted to be like Brooklyn, feisty but bad.
But I don't view that as like a big difference, because I think they wanted to secure that pick and retain their pick.
I completely agree. Completely agree.
When you take Tejan Salon with a 6th overall pick, you are saying, "Hey, NBA ready rookies, we don't need you. We're cool with being bad." That's what that says. Because there's a laundry list of guys that could help, and not even in the top 10. Yeah. Like the draft class, we all know, isn't the best.
Klingon was the one. Klingon was the one guy who I think you can look back on and go, he would have contributed this year and made a difference. I don't think any of the other guys who were available, you could have said Jared McCain, but let's just be frank, he was like never really going to be in contention for that pick.
But you got Edie, you got Ware, you got Misi, you got Collier. Like there are all these guys that are having really good rookie years that are contributing to teams where you have Tejan Salon who's not. Like even Connect. Like there are guys there are bodies that are capable NBA players today, and Salon may never get there. And I think when you do that, you're saying we're cool with being bad. And I think that set the tone for the rest of the season for me.
So I agree with that.
In the rest of the offseason as well.
I agree. They were always planning to be a lottery team this year. I wrote an article in the offseason about how they had a very narrow path to success this year. How you had to show signs of progress from last year for the season to be considered successful, but you couldn't reach the playoffs because you'd lose your pick, which would be a disaster. Mm-hmm. And you kind of wanted to be in that like 24 to 32 win range where like you've still got pretty good lottery odds to land somewhere, but you could like sell the fan base that we're making progress. And the reason you need to show progress is because otherwise, if you're not making progress, the good young players that you think you've got and are good and young aren't as good as you thought, and that's an even bigger issue.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, have you got more points here?
So yeah, looking at the offseason, right? Take Salon, draft KJ Simpson. Simpson pick is a really solid second round pick. I like KJ Simpson. They bring back Seth Curry. They sign Taj Gibson. They trade for Josh Green. They extend Miles Bridges, bring in Diabate, and they trade for like they do the weird Jeffries deal. Based off what we saw last season, I don't think they didn't go out their way to make the team much better going into this season. And then when the season started, they just continue down the path, moving Nick Richards, which is a valid thing. Like I'm more than cool with that. Get the second rounders, they get a Koji back, right? They try to trade Mark Williams. We know how that worked out. They bring in Nurkic, they dump the Cody and Mičić salaries, and they extend Musa. But when you look at like the guys that they didn't plan on losing and how they reacted to that with Trey Mann, what roster move is associated with the Trey Mann injury, right? Grant Williams. They got an exception for Grant. The exception's about to expire, right?
No, I believe they used that for the Diabate deal, actually.
Did they?
Yeah, room for convert Diabate, they used I'm sure they used it on someone now.
But even to that end, Grant got hurt. The team was 6-10 and tied for the 10th seed. The Diabate deal happened, a month ago?
Yeah.
What the, like, they were in the playing picture then.
He was able to play. It's not like he didn't play. Diabate obviously had 50 whatever games on his two-way, so it's not like, they didn't play him. He was able to play even when Williams went down, but...
Yeah, but, like, they were in the mix, and they were down a guy, and Diabate was already there, so they are down Grant Williams, and they made no attempt to replace Grant Williams, is what I'm saying. When they were in the play-in at that point. It was like a 3 or 4-way tie. It was super early in the season. A lot of things could still happen in their favor, and they could have gone down that road if they wanted to, but didn't. And then Brandon Miller out for the year. We know how that goes. The season was pretty much over. That was January 23rd. It's been done at that point. So I think you can draw a straight line between draft night to the Grant Williams injury. It's proof positive. This team had zero interest in being competitive this season and landed us where we are right now.
So I agree with all that. I started this at 60% for the same reason, because last year I think the team wanted to be good and they weren't. This year I think the team wanted to be in the lottery and they are. So I went into this thinking, because last year I had the front office rated at 55%, and I went into this going, I feel that this front office is more responsible for this team being bad than last year's. That was my big picture outlook. But then I started looking at the detail, and if you remember last offseason, the front office didn't have a backup point guard. If you remember that, like they signed Ish Smith the day before the season, and it was like
they held Frank Ntilikina all season while he was injured, just taking up a roster spot.
Yeah, like what is going on there, right? Yeah. They didn't have a third big on the roster. They ended up having to play Nathan Mensah because they didn't have a veteran presence on the roster. Remember how much we talked about they need a vet in the room. Whereas I look at the roster heading into this season, they brought in vets, Seth Curry, Hodge Gibson. I actually feel that their roster build-up, you looked at the roster at the start of the season, and it looked pretty good, pretty deep. LaMelo Ball, Trey Mann, Vasiljevic, like all good. Like three, Vasiljevic did not work out, but everyone of what we saw last year, you could understand that there was, and what we saw in the Olympics, there was a fair enough reason to think that he was going to be able to contribute as a good backup.
Mm-hmm.
You had Mark Williams, Nick Richards, Musa Diabate, who was a great addition by this front office, and he has helped them win games, Musa Diabate, this year. You had Miles Bridges and Grant Williams as like front court versatile pieces. You had Cody Martin coming off the bench behind Brandon Miller. Like, I think a lot of this made sense. Nick Smith Jr. wasn't even supposed to be in the rotation for this team, but he's had to be. So I think this team actually had less gaps in its rotation than last year's. I think they filled out the roster in a more sensible way. It's just those injuries cut the legs out from under that and exposed all the same issues that the team had all over again. I think the Curry Diabate ads were really good, small like fringe roster additions. Josh Green was a type of player that I think the team needed to add as like a ball stopping wing defender who can put on the opposing team's best player. We'd seen Terry Rozier do that for 2-3 years. It was just not going to get us anywhere alongside LaMelo Ball in the backcourt. This was the best way to help maximize LaMelo Ball, and I think that helped him early in the season having that. Mm-hmm. So I do think it was failure by design, but I don't think they're meant to be this bad. And the moves you talked about, trading Nick Richards and Cody Martin and Micic, trading them for Nurkic and Okogie, that might have helped this team more this year, right? Micic was bad. Martin was injured a lot. Like you said, Okogie looks like a good pickup. And Nurkic and Richards, the reason they wanted to get rid of Nurkic was because of the money, not because he was and he'd fallen out with the coach. Not necessarily because Nick Richards was a way better player than Yusuf Nurkic. So I actually think those moves might have even improved the roster. We've not seen it because of the health, again, of Okogie, and Nurkic has been in and out a little bit. But I do think those trades actually made the roster better as the season went along. But I do take your point, right? Like in the summer, they just used all their cap space to take on bad contracts, bad salaries in relation with draft picks. They weren't trying to make this team better, but I actually think this team was better balanced and set up for the front office, and just things didn't go well. But I agree with you on the Salon selection as well. Like you set the tone right there, but you should never be drafting rookies to make an impact in your rookie year anyway. But I do agree that is blame for the front office there.
Yeah, I mean, you just hope the rookie has a chance. Like with Salon, I think it was pretty clear that this guy was so raw there was zero chance he would be an effective rotational guy right away. Where a guy who may be a 4-year starter in college, that would have been more of your focus if you're a team that was trying to really compete, or just taking a shot at a guy that can help fit into your rotation and round out your roster a little bit. But I think I started at 80% and I landed at 72. I feel pretty good about it. Because I think this is all according to plan.
And like I say, I started at 60. I dialed it back because I think Jeff Peterson did a better job building out this roster than Mitch Kupchak last year. I just don't think the results on the court have made that apparent this year for reasons that I think are lucky. And that's why I boosted the look. So that's probably one of our big differences there. So to recap, Sam, you just give people a recap of your blame pie percentages.
Yes. So going big to small, front office, 72%. The players, 16%. The coaching staff, 9%. And luck, 3%. All
right. And to follow your model there, I'm going to go front office, 45%. Players 25%, luck 20%, and coaching 10%. So a little bit more spread around than I was last year, where I think I had, a little bit differently. I told you at the start of the show I was going to ask ChatGPT to do the same exercise, and this is what AI says: luck 40%. There we go. Front office 30%. coaching 20% and players 10%. So quite different to us in our rankings. Interesting that they scored luck more highly. I think that's interesting, right? I mean, AI is very flawed, but there is a world where you could look at this and chalk, a high percentage of this up to luck. But I think when you follow the team as long and as detail as we have, it's really dangerous just to like fall back on like, oh, well, if everyone was healthy, it would be like a completely different story. Because, and I've said this for years, we say there was Chase back in the play-in seasons when it's like, no, these issues, even when there are injuries, that player or two coming back isn't fixing all the issues. Like, yeah, they'd be better, but there are fundamental issues with how the roster is built and the players on the roster who they're choosing to play through and who they've got on the team that aren't going to go away just magically by like getting player X or Y back. And I still feel that way now. And that's why I think all options, like you said at the start, are on the table about who they move. The only truly untouchable player on this team right now, probably Brandon Miller.
Yes.
And that's the end of the list. That is it.
Mm-hmm. And to be frank, totally valid, in my opinion. If I know we're towards the end of the podcast, this is a whole different discussion for a different day.
Maybe it's next week. Maybe we do it next week. Do we do the LaMelo Ball trade podcast next week?
Let's do it, bro. I'm locked in. I'm here for it. Let's talk about it because I think it's a completely reasonable adult conversation to have. I know some people get real crazy about it, and to each his own. But it's been 5 years of LaMelo Ball in Charlotte. There's enough to make a decision on what you want to do with him going forward or not.
And the reason I'm more open to it now than I've ever have been at another point, and there's two main reasons. And actually, LaMelo Ball's play or like poor play is not either of these. Like does not factor into them at all. One is that if you want to move LaMelo Ball, you don't do it in a season where he's played 10 games and broken his foot. You do it in a season where he's been able to play and he's been able to be on the floor and show his value and show his ability. And it's not been perfect this year, but like you said, he's going to play the most games he has out of the last 2 seasons. I think more than 2 seasons combined, he's on track to do. So that's one reason you do it now, is because the trade value is higher now than it was in either of the previous 2 seasons when he was injured. Yep. The second reason you do it now is because I think the team is further away than I thought it was. Right? 2 years ago, you're thinking, God, if they just get healthy again and bring back Miles Bridges, like they'll get back to that playing status. And now the runway looks a lot longer. And that's intentional because that's what the front office have done with the moves that they've made. But then my argument is, well, like LaMelo Ball being on this 5-year max contract, like this team might not be good until year 4 and 5 of that. And at that point, is there value there? And are you better to move on now if you're going to take that long runway approach, which the team seems to have chosen to do? So that's the reason I'd be more open to moving LaMelo Ball now. It's nothing to do, I think, with LaMelo Ball being worse or his play being terrible, like some people might want to point out. This isn't a knee-jerk to that. It's the other factors surrounding it with the franchise.
I completely agree. And I'm so down to do a full podcast on this later.
Well, I this is full truth. I've been messaging some of the court covers the Orlando Magic today, throwing around hypothetical LaMelo Ball trades.
Okay.
Of seeing how it would work. And I hadn't told you that beforehand, but I was messaging around just like if they did, right, how would it go down? And I don't understand why like this always. I saw like Mike Scotto, of Hoops Hype had a report the other day about league sources are, monitoring LaMelo Ball, and everyone kind of flurries into activity about, they might trade LaMelo. It's like, I don't know why people are waiting for this like report from Mike Scotto to like do that. Like we should all. They just tried to trade Mark freaking Williams out of the blue. If you didn't think that LaMelo Ball is completely on the table for the right offer,
Luka.
after that,
once Luka goes, anybody
Exactly.
can go.
Exactly.
Anybody can go.
So I don't know why all of a sudden people be like, "What? They might trade him." We've been telling you this for a while. Like this is going to be on the table. Yeah.
Yeah, I was walking the dog today thinking about teams to trade LaMelo to. Like who would do it and what kind of teams? And I came up with like 4 or 5 like really solid landing spots for him. So
Well, you could add Dallas to that list now, maybe.
they are on the list.
You can have your pick back. No. Give us some more firsts. All right, Sam. Good job on Blame Pie. Fun exercise to do.
Yeah.
I found it harder this year. I found it more difficult. I felt it was closer. I didn't feel as confident as I did last year in terms of how to allocate the blame. Obviously, there is only so much that we can do, but I think we gave some good insights there. So I'll sort out a little graphic. We'll get it out here so that we can show our blame pie on social media afterwards. But other than that, nothing else from me, Sam. We'll get out of here till next week.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for everybody for listening. Check out hornetsonsi.com and we will see you next week.